to as, if I'm correcting it or pronouncing it correctly, is a vernal pool.
Yeah, that's correct.
Works enough.
Yeah, and those are shallow depressions, which is what we're talking about here, that hold all that water through those spring and summer months so those plants can grow. So that's what that area is referred to.
Yeah.
The last layer of the cake is going to be the R horizon, which I'm pretty sure stands for rock.
Gee.
Because it's the bedrock layer. That is, of course, a almost impermeable layer of the earth. Some water does go down through it, but it's the rock layer.
Yeah. And then below that, about 10 feet, is the molten magma at the center of the earth.
Not quite 10 feet, I'm sure, but yes, eventually, I'm sure.
Sooner or later, you get down there.
It gets to be molten magma.
Yeah.
That's your favorite part of the cake, evidently, Joe.
Yeah.
Well, these soil horizons are what the Mima mounds are made up of. And as I said, this is the typical or the general makeup. It's not specific. Some are more complex. Some are less complex than that. Some may have 1 and 2. Some may have 5 or 6 layers. And we didn't talk about all of them because that's a soil science show that we're not going to do.
And they seem to be, are they kind of equally distributed throughout the mound? It's kind of the same kind of layer, or are they some thicker, some thinner? Do you know? Do they know? I mean,
well, okay, yeah. That's one of the things that really, really irritated me is I did some research on this, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, where you're going here, Devin, is that we've got the mound, and the mound itself goes A, B, C, R, and then there's the depression. And does the depression go A, B, C,
yeah, are they
R?
similar makeups?
I can't find that.
Okay.
Honestly, I've looked, and some researchers say, yes, they're the same, though they're a much thinner makeup. In other words, the layers are much narrower. And some say, oh, no, it's a very thin A, and then a very thin C, and then we go to R. There's no conclusive evidence, but I think that might be because everybody's focused on the mounds themselves rather than digging between them.
Which is odd, I guess, because if you're going to, and I know we're close to theories, but if you're going to theorize that they're a natural formation, you have to know what's around them.
In between
right?
them, yeah.
You know, so if it's what's between them is a similar makeup, you can more readily say, well, it's just a bigger collection of that, and that's fine, and maybe we don't know exactly why, but it's all very similar to the soil around it, versus, oh, this isn't anything like the soil around, so it's some kind of anomaly. That's the thing that gets me. It seems like that would be a thing that people would be interested in.
Well, I think to settle this question, what we need to do is let me grab a couple of shovels, because the Mima mounds are not that far away.
No.
We'll get there.
Actually, Joe...
quickly though, let me say that my understanding of it is that there's a fairly thick layer of clay underneath these things, and that the clay in the areas between them is just not very far down. It's basically almost just solid clay soil there.
I've seen that, and the opposite. So that's the hard part. But I'm going to get a little bit off track here in terms of what I know everybody's expecting me to go through in this studio. Is that when I was in high school, I took a couple of soil science classes, and I don't know if either of you have ever got into a soil trench to figure out what the horizons are. It's insanely interesting to be able to look at in let's say a 5-foot deep trench, and you can very clearly in a color band see those things
it's
change.
Very striated.
Yes.
Yeah, I went to a weird middle school, so I had an experience.
I did that in high school.
I was able to do that, and it's true. It's very interesting. It's very clear. So all you would have to do is really cut that mound in half like a cake, and take a look. And
that's. I know that the problem is here is this. It's all in a preserve, so I'm sure that they can't just take a backhoe and dig one giant trench from the middle of one mound into the next, and then walk inside of it and figure it out. So I think that might be part of the reason that we can't get the answer.
You could take core samples, though.
True.
That's
very true. You could.
I also suspect people don't really care enough.
I'll
be honest. We're very interested in it, but I think that real scientists are probably thinking, "Oh well, they're
whatever.
They're mounds. It's fine. We have to explore the sea or something."
Yeah, I think that also apparently the Gopher Protection Society won't allow that because they're afraid that the core sampler tool will puncture a gopher.
I mean, that's fair.
So, yeah,
that's a fair concern.
Well, actually,
don't get too far ahead of us here, Joe.
Yeah.
With your, you are all about the rodent theory. I understand that.
Oh, yeah.
But we're not at the rodent theory.
What are we at?
We're in the theory section.
Okay.
But the first theory is, I will admit, my favorite theory, which is glaciers.
Oh.
I'm going to start off, unusually enough, with my favorite. The last glacial period on North America, the North American continent, I should say, ended about 10,000 years ago. And there is a lot of scientific evidence of the shaping that those glaciers did to this continent. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we can just look at and go, oh yeah, obviously a glacier carved that out or left that behind.
Yeah, the gorge is a great example of that.
Yep. And there's giant rocks left all over. So we know that glaciers did some amazing things.
And we had some pretty amazing glaciers here. I mean, I can't honestly remember the name of the
Kardashian Glacier?
Oh, the Bob Jones Glacier. I don't remember. But
you guys are the worst.
Which one were you going after?
I can't remember the name of it. But
what did it
the
do?
one that carved out the gorge. The Missoula floods.
Mm-hmm.
The Missoula floods. It wasn't an actual glacier. It was a flood. And what happened?
And this is for the Columbia River Gorge.
The Columbia and the Willamette, kind of all of the gorges that we have around here, they were all formed by what happened was there was during the Ice Age, there were these huge glaciers that formed, and they started to melt, and of course they created an ice dam. And so once that dam burst, it created these huge floods that just ravaged the area and somehow just created all of this gorge activity. And certainly some of it has
the course
been
of least resistance and
and certainly,
carved it out.
Some of it has been over the ages, gets deeper and deeper, but that was the general formation of it. The Missoula floods.
Okay.
Look it up. Not the Kardashian Glacier or anything like that.
Kind of bad news for the people that happen to be living in that little depression.
The good news is nobody was living there.
It was ice.
It was 13,000
plus years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
actually, there were people living here back then.
Back to the point.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's okay. Is that this first theory that one that I'm kind of hanging on to is that the glaciers form the Maima Mounds. And the soil structure of the mounds, which obviously I just described, is old and stable, and it's feasible that glaciers, as they advanced or retreated in their process, like you were just talking about there a little bit, formed it, scraping away the ground. I should probably also mention, which I didn't, is that the soil structure of the Maima Mounds is, in some of them, very old. It's somewhere up to about 30,000 years old, which would match up to glaciers.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of break this down to things that we see. And so I'm going to give an example. Have either of you seen when it's freezing cold out and there's a chunk of ice that's kind of overhanging and it's sunny in the day but really cold and then cold at night, and you'll notice that the ice starts to thaw a little bit, and on the underside the droplets will, through what's the word that I'm looking for, cohesion, they'll come together and refreeze, and you'll get kind of a bulge, and then in the daytime everything will freeze and you'll get a slightly bigger bulge, and so you get higher bulges and deeper ridges, so you get this kind of weird curvilinear structure on the underside of a sheet of ice. Have you seen this before?
Yeah, I mean, you're basically talking about the formation of icicles, but yeah.
Well, but on a big flat plane, so it doesn't have that large drop.
Yeah,
to go
but
through.
I guess only on the underside of things. I don't think I've ever seen it on the overside of things.
Exactly. Okay. Well, but that's the thing, is if this is on the bottom of a glacier, which is huge and heavy, and that water through cohesion is coming together and then freezing, and this of course wouldn't be on a day-night cycle, but over a year's cycle, that weight is going to shove the soil underneath it around. Think about the underside of this glacier like egg crate foam, that silly egg crate foam that the sleeping pads are made out of. If it was something like that, but it's really strong and hard and it's pushing down on the earth, it's going to shove the dirt around and make those ridges. Of course, then when it melts, we've got this egg crate shape going on. Give it 10,000 years, some erosion happens, and instead of these perfect divots between them, the plane of the soil evens out between them. So now all we have is these random bulges at different places. That's where this theory goes, and I don't know if that makes sense the way I've explained it to you, or if you have a better way to describe that.
No, I mean, I understand. I understand what you're saying. I think that if it's water and it's pushing into the ground, it's probably going to get absorbed into the ground, not...
It's melting down into those bulges and then refreezing.
Yeah.
And of course, that collective
melting.
weight, it's melting... glaciers are really, really wily creatures. No, I understand where you're saying, wait, if it's water, why doesn't it go into the soil? I understand where you're headed with that. I can see that. But I can't explain it because I can't explain the glaciers to that degree. I just look at it from what I have seen anecdotally in nature, and then add all that weight and pressure.
I guess my other problem with that theory is the glacier has to escape somewhere, right? So either it melted on a massive scale without moving and sliding anywhere, because you don't see those big gouges in the earth, right? So either because you would expect if it had these big divots that would be a rake pattern almost across the landscape.
Yeah, I'm not saying that they're moving, but it's more they're melting on themselves and then refreezing and building back.
Yeah. I understand that, but I'm saying at the end of the ice age, right? Is it just melting away and the water just washes away and it leaves these divot marks, or is it that it's melting and it's going to melt on the bottom, and is it sliding somewhere? Is it gouging something out?
I don't know that it would. I don't claim to know a lot about glaciers, but my understanding of glaciers is the way they were able to grind out big valleys and stuff, which you see all over around here, is that as it grows, the weight grows, and it starts sliding, moving forward, and adding on and stuff, and then that's when the grinding occurs. Is when it's growing.
Okay.
But when it's retreating, it doesn't slide backwards quite the same way when it's retreating.
Sure.
It just gets thinner and thinner.
So it just melts.
It just melts away.
It just slowly melts, and it melts from the top. Not it melts, but the only problem I have with the glacier theory is that you would think that it would eventually, a lot of the water that came off of the glacier as it melts would wash a lot of this stuff away.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah,
and while I like the glacier theory the most, if this theory were correct, and this is going to come up multiple times in the theory section. We should see this in more than just this place. And like I said, it's continentally for the United States. You see this, you see it in some places in the south, in some in the east, but you think that you would see it more consistently, but that also you might not see it because of farming practices. That might be a reason that we don't see it anymore.
Yeah, I know a lot of it got cleared away. But also, that's another problem I have with this theory is that it is seen in the South, where, as far as I know, there was never any glaciation.
Yeah, you're right. And again, there are some other things that might be responsible for this in the South.
Well,
and that's actually... go ahead.
I was just going to ask one more question, is that you see these singularly as well, right? And that obviously can't have happened if you're saying it was a divot in between a bunch of things. You can't create just one mound from a divot. You've got to have at least 2, probably 4.
I can see it. Well, no.
Right.
Let's. Okay, we got a flat sheet of ice, and for some reason, it's got a thin spot in the top, and so the water in the thin spot in the top is melting, and it's seeping down through itself, and then it's going to create that pattern radiating away. Again, not perfect. I understand.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying 2 different things are happening then at that point.
No, it's there's a thin spot at the top, so that's where the melt happens. So then it's going to melt down, and it's going to radiate down and create a cone, essentially.
Right, so that's exactly what I'm saying, is you're saying 2 different things.
No, and it doesn't work. I get
Okay.
it. It doesn't work. I like this one the best, and we
Fair.
beat the crap
I'm
out
sorry,
of it.
I'm sorry.
I like it.
We better move on. Yeah,
We better.
And,
We better move on.
we're going to go through some fairly mundane theories here, just to let you folks know. But don't despair. There's going to be some aliens before it's all done.
There always
And some
are.
critters, too.
Yeah.
Little
aliens?
cute fuzzy things.
Okay, and I've got a theory of my own that I'm going to tack in on
my
top
God.
of all
Oh,
this.
boy.
I
All right,
don't,
well, then we
sorry.
better hurry up.
Yeah.
Our next theory is plant and or wind. This is going to take a little bit of explaining too, but the theory centers around basically the interaction between large plants, the wind, and blown sediment.
Yeah.
And tell you right now, the beginning of this theory does not hold up for the state of Washington.
Okay.
This is more of an arid region theory, but we'll kind of try and see how it could work in. The process of windblown sediment is what is known as an aeolian process. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
I think it's aeolian.
I believe
could be
that's
wrong.
right. And what that is that you've got dry earthen materials that are picked up by the wind, so sand and silt. They're blown around. It runs into vegetation, so a tree or a bush or whatever it is, of course, then it's knocked free and it drops to the ground. As that continues to happen over an extended period of time, you get a mound of earth built up around this plant. If we think about trees, which can live on the scale of hundreds of years, that means that you can get quite a large mound built, and then when the plant dies and rots away, all that's left is the mound.
And actually, what I like about this theory is that,
It's very much like dunes.
well, exactly, if you look at these mounds, the pictures of them, they look like sand dunes, but they're different in one way, which is that instead of forming into kind of rows and stuff, they become sort of regular mounds. But when you look at especially sort of like high level, like looking at it from above, and you look at the spacing between them, it's not completely even, but it's the kind of spacing that you would see between, say, trees in a forest. In other words, they're spaced enough apart so that they don't choke each other out.
And that is
then
what is
close
known
enough.
as vegetation spatial patterning.
Exactly, and it looks exactly like that. But if you look at the aerial photos of the Mima Mounds,
And we're going to get into vegetation spatial patterning, but let me just finish up one little bit. Devin's rolling her eyes, but one little bit about the problem with the aeolian process is that, as I said, this is a process that happens in arid regions. The Pacific Northwest is by no means an arid region.
Nor has it really ever been.
It has not anything that I could find even suggested that that area was ever arid. It's always been wet.
Yeah.
So this doesn't hold up. So I admit there's a giant flaw in that, but it is something that's pointed at.
I guess another problem that I would have is that, didn't you say that there are rocks in a lot of these mounds?
That is another problem.
Yeah.
There are small stones and there are large stones under the surface and on top. So yes, windblown material, that's a problem. Because the wind doesn't throw big rocks.
Huge rocks like that.
Yes, that's an issue.
Yeah.
If we go to the spatial patterning that Joe was alluding to or discussing. This and what vegetation spatial patterning, which is an easy phrase to say, not. This is the theory that, or the practice that individual or groups of plants, so we've got a number of them growing together, will spread their roots out and they will drain the surrounding area of all of the nutrients that are in the soil.
Right.
Making it a wasteland.
For other plants.
For other plants.
Yeah.
So
And-
nothing else can grow there.
And then you have no roots holding the topsoil down.
So then that dirt washes away, and then you end up with these strange rivulet patterns between them. Here's something to think about. An easy way to envision this is if anybody has ever seen mangroves. You see them, they have those giant weird root patterns and they arch up above the water. Now think about something like that where its roots are still underground, but the dirt that would be on top between them is gone. You would have the same kind of mounding, humping pattern that you find at the Mima Mounds. It makes sense. I'm not going to buy into it, but it makes sense. But it also does help what Devin pointed out, which is the issue with the stones and rocks. There's a lot of evidence that roots will grab and move stones through pressure that they grow next to. I mean, we've all seen they'll break stones, they'll push them around. So this does happen, and it will push them to the surface if a root gets big enough.
Yes, I agree with that. The problem I'm having is the size of a lot of these mounds, right? I'm willing to go there for the smaller ones, but if we're talking, I mean, 160 feet round, was that?
I think that's kind of rare, though, isn't it? 160
That's on the
feet.
large scale.
I mean,
Sure, it's on the large side, but...
Okay, well, bear with me. Run with me here. Okay, how big do you think the root structure of, say, a mature oak would be? Which oaks get huge.
pretty big.
Yeah, it would be big.
Yeah.
It
big.
would be huge. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that this is something that happens in a matter of 5 years.
Sure.
But those oaks live hundreds of years. If that oak lived hundreds of years, and the odds of this happening with oaks, I understand, is infinitesimal, but I'm just using it as an example. If we've got a forest of rows of oaks that all have these giant root balls that eventually die, that could explain the structure. I'm not all for it, but I am. That's just my little bit of defense for it.
Sure. If Washington was an arid place.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
But this is. I think that the thing that I need to point out is for this for the spatial patterning is part of it is erosion because the roots are holding it
Sure.
in. So now we're getting erosion with the root patterns as well. I've essentially at this point discounted the wind theory.
Yeah.
But now we're factoring in erosion. So we're that's the hard part with this theory. Or this story in general is that things get added and discounted left, right, and center, and I'm doing my best to keep them separate.
That's fair.
But this one is one of those weird ones where they say, well, the wind brought it in, and then the plants held it, and then the water washed it away, and it makes it awkward.
Yeah.
Awkward's the word I'm going to use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of awkward, let's just leave that theory behind. Let's move on to the next one, which says that the Mima Mounds are creature created.
Okay.
And this is the mammal version, and that would be pocket gophers.
They're cute little devils.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've never heard of a pocket gopher?
No, I have. I'm just laughing that they could have created these things. So let's just.
Gophers
I'm just letting you go for it.
Joe likes him. He's going to make a pocket gopher meme next week.
Absolutely. Yeah, pocket gophers are industrious little critters, actually.
They
can
really
move-
are.
They can move a lot of dirt.
They can.
Yeah.
The pocket gopher theory has actually been around for a long time. Came out in the late. It was theorized that the mounds were actually built by the pocket gopher. Anybody who doesn't know what a pocket gopher is a rodent.
Yeah.
It's really, on average, they weigh less than half a pound. They're anywhere from 6 to 8 inches long, and that includes their tail. And of course, they're gophers, so they have really terrible eyesight. They don't come above the ground very much. And unlike most gophers, which will either dig a hole and push the dirt into the bottom of their tunnel structure, or just push it up out and keep going, pocket gophers seem to have the habit of pushing all of the dirt they dig out to the top of the mound of dirt that's above their tunnel and continue to push it towards the top. So if you've ever had gopher holes in your yard and they're those goofy mounds, now imagine they keep coming to the same spot, but they keep pushing all the extra dirt up top and building it up higher and higher. That's what they do. And that's what's got people kind of intrigued as to why they think that these little boogers are responsible.
Yeah. And actually, I'm kind of liking this theory, not just because the gophers are cute, but it also fits a lot of facts, like they're territorial.
You're exactly right. They're very territorial little critters, and it turns out that the spacing of the Mima mounds corresponds, relatively speaking, to the territorial distance that a pocket gopher will cover. It's somewhere between 100 and 150 feet.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. There's a researcher at San Diego State University that he wanted to see if this theory could be right. And what he did is he took and made a computer model factoring in the speed that these little gophers build at, and it turns out, indeed, note this, eventually, they can make a mound that is upwards of 6 feet tall.
Okay.
Yeah, it takes a bit of time.
It does take a bit of time. Now, other people have jumped on the bandwagon, and they're saying, oh, yeah, and they're building them that tall so that they can escape the water table of where they're living, because as we've talked about, it's a very boggy area, so the water table is pretty high.
A big clay area that holds water and actually prevents water from draining into it.
Yes, which means they would have flooded tunnels. So yes, it makes sense they would build up to have a dry area, but it's a little weird. But here's the problem.
There are a lot of problems.
Well,
with this.
yeah. There's a whole lot of problems, which is that, to start with, it would take 500 to 700 years for gophers to build a mound that tall.
Okay.
Yeah.
The
Problem number one. Problem number two, pocket gophers, no matter how cute they are with the little pockets in their cheeks, only live to be at most 5 years old. Which says, well, how does this happen? People have said, oh, well, other little gophers come in and they take over their mounds and they keep building them, and that's how it happens. But the research that I've read, nothing in there says that after a gopher dies and leaves its burrow or its tunnel structure, does another one come in and take it over?
Well,
They all seem to start from scratch themselves.
Yeah, but isn't it possible you can inherit as a gopher the family home? I mean, gophers have babies.
I guess my problem number 3.
Gopher family home?
Well, no, I mean seriously though. I mean, if you have baby gophers and then eventually you die, why should they move off somewhere else and start a whole new tunnel network when they've got one right already there?
I'm going to kill that right now with I don't believe that they're a communal family structure. I think they all move on their own. But Devin, you cut you off.
He did.
Sorry.
No, my problem number 3 is that if this is a mound that's built by digging out, right, the top layer should correspond to the bottom layer of the soil, the top layer of the mound, because that's what they've been digging out last. And the bottom layer should correspond to the top layer of the soil that they were digging out, not the way that it goes. Right?
No, I know where you're headed here. If gophers were digging and mixing the soil constantly, it shouldn't be easily divided into horizons. It should actually be one giant mishmash mix.
Well, but
If
even
a lot of
then-
layers
I would think
get
that, yeah.
pulled up, it should be an undistinguishable layers. Of
Right.
what it should be.
And even if it was layers, it should be flipped layers.
At-
Bottom layer of the mound should
Simply
be.
breaking it to the simplest factor.
Yeah.
Yes, it
Yeah.
should be. The clay should be on top.
Should be.
Yes, and there's the problem with the stones that we talked about earlier, which is a half-pound critter cannot move a 10-pound stone.
Right. I guess also a problem, there aren't like huge tunnels running through these things, are there? As far as
Yeah,
anybody
I don't know
knows?
if they found tunnels in
Yeah.
these things.
No,
Yeah.
I've not
would be
seen
another issue.
anything that said, here's a picture of a pocket gopher tunnel in a Mima mound. Haven't
Yeah.
seen that.
I haven't seen any evidence of that now. But I still
well-
like the gopher theory because gophers are cute.
Yeah, I know. We're going to move on to the next creature created theory.
Okay.
This one I am going to, right off the bat, I put in because it's in the research, but I don't buy it. But it's still in the creature area, which is termites.
Ew. What? Termites are gross.
They are gross. There are people out there who say that the mounds are made by termites.
Mm-hmm.
And before anybody has their head pop off, let's just think about termite mounds that we see in places like Africa. You see these giant termite mounds.
Similar
And they're-
problem for me though.
Bear with me. They're
I know.
giant above and below ground.
Mm-hmm.
So theoretically, those critters die off and then erosion takes effect. But you're right, there is no record of that kind of termite in that region.
Mm-hmm. Right. Or, the different layers in the mounds, or the no holes, or the 5-pound stones,
There's
10-pound
that.
stones.
But the biggest problem with it is that it's kind of hard to believe that there would be literally trillions of termites living in this plane. With I mean, seriously, think about it. When you see anthills and termite hills, they're kind of a one-off kind of thing. You don't see
Yeah,
hundreds and
that's
thousands
true.
of them next to each other.
That's also true.
Well, actually, you see them sometimes in the plains of Africa where they're close to each other. Not nearly this close, but they are, let's say, 500 to 1,000 feet apart instead of miles apart.
Yeah.
I know where you're going, and I agree.
Yeah,
But there
it-
are cases where you see them close, but not nearly this close.
Yeah, no, I mean, because if you've got nothing but termites living in this vast area, there's nothing to eat except each other, and that's it. So I just don't see that.
Yeah. No, I admit I put this one in just because it's there.
That's fine.
I don't buy into
And everybody
it.
loves termites, so
Except Devin.
No. What's next?
Let's move on to the next one, which I actually love how this one came about, or the theory got created. But the theory is that it is earthquakes or seismic vibrations are causing the mounds.
Okay.
The theory goes as a basic premise that there are vibrations due to seismic or volcanic activity that is shaking the dirt around, and at that point, that's causing it to heap up into small mounds.
Sure.
This is where my favorite part of this theory comes from. There's a gentleman by the name of Andrew Berg, who is an actual geologist,
Oh, yeah,
not
we're
somebody
friends.
who just came up with this idea on his own.
Yeah, I know him. I'm sorry, I don't know him.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm being
I
a
do like
jerk.
I do like the way he stumbled upon the idea, though. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, he was building a doghouse, of all things, with a bunch of sheets of plywood that had ash on them, and I don't know what kind of ash.
Was it in
It's-
the 1980s?
Yeah, volcanic ash.
Oh yeah, it was in the 80s, which means it would have been St. Helens had spewed all that ash.
I was around in those days, and yes, there was a lot of ash.
Okay,
There was a-
so now we know why there was ash on his plywood.
Okay.
And he is hammering nails into the